Jake Miller wheeled his squeaky maintenance cart down the grimy corridors of Terra Station's lower levels. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting weird shadows on the metal walls. He'd been working these same hallways for 2 years now, fixing broken pipes and cleaning up messes that nobody else wanted to deal with. It wasn't the glamorous space adventure he'd dreamed about as a kid back on Earth, but the pay was decent and it beat being unemployed on some crowded city planet. The waste processing sector always smelled like recycled air and industrial cleaner. Jake had gotten used to it by now, though he still caught himself holding his breath sometimes when he passed the worst sections. Most days were routine: replace a filter here, unclog a drain there, sweep up whatever garbage the night shift had left behind. The alien workers from other species barely acknowledged him. To them, he was just another human doing the dirty work that kept the station running. Jake was humming an old Earth song when something caught his eye near the recycling chutes. At first, he thought it was just a piece of discarded tech or maybe some exotic trash from one of the merchant ships. But then it moved, just slightly, and Jake realized it was alive. The creature was incredibly small, no bigger than Jake's closed fist. Its body was covered in what looked like tiny crystal scales that shifted and changed color even as he watched. The scales were mostly gray now, dull and lifeless, but Jake could see hints of other colors underneath. The little thing was curled up in a tight ball, and its breathing was so shallow that Jake had to look closely to see its chest moving up and down. "What the hell?" Jake muttered under his breath, glancing around to make sure nobody was watching. The corridor was empty except for him and whatever this thing was. He crouched down next to it, being careful not to make any sudden movements. Up close, he could see that the creature was in bad shape. Its scales were cracked in places, and there were scorch marks along its tiny body like it had been through some kind of explosion or fire. But what really got Jake's attention were its eyes. Even though they were barely open, he could see intelligence there. This wasn't just some space animal, this thing was aware, maybe even trying to communicate. "Hey there, little guy," Jake whispered, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "You look pretty rough." The creature's eyes focused on him, and for just a moment, Jake swore he saw something like hope flicker across its face. It tried to lift its head but didn't have the strength. Jake looked around again. The other workers had been walking past this spot all day. He'd seen the Zentorian cleanup crew come through here twice, and a group of vegan traders had cut through this corridor just an hour ago. None of them had stopped. To them, this was probably just another piece of space junk, not worth their time or attention. But Jake couldn't just walk away. Maybe it was because he'd always been the kind of guy who brought home stray cats as a kid, or maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be ignored and forgotten. Either way, he made a decision that would change everything. Checking one more time to make sure the coast was clear, Jake carefully scooped up the tiny creature. It was surprisingly light, and he could feel how fragile it was through his work gloves. The thing didn't resist, it probably didn't have the energy to fight even if it wanted to. Jake tucked the creature inside his jacket and finished his rounds as quickly as possible. His heart was pounding the whole time, partly from excitement and partly from fear of getting caught. Station regulations were pretty clear about bringing unauthorized life forms into the residential sections, but Jake figured what the supervisors didn't know wouldn't hurt them. Back in his small quarters, Jake cleared off his workbench and started gathering supplies. He used a plastic storage container to make a makeshift bed, lining it with soft cleaning rags. He rigged up a small heat lamp from some old electronics and positioned it so the creature would stay warm without getting burned. The hardest part was figuring out what to feed it. Jake tried offering water first, using a tiny dropper he'd borrowed from the medical bay. The creature managed a few drops, which seemed to help a little. Then Jake shared his dinner, nothing fancy, just the standard protein bars and vitamin paste that all the human workers got. To his surprise, the creature seemed interested in the protein bar, managing to eat small pieces when Jake broke them up. By the end of the first day, the creature's scales had started showing hints of blue and green instead of that lifeless gray. By the second day, it was able to lift its head and look around. Jake started calling it Pip, because it made these tiny chirping sounds that reminded him of baby birds back on Earth. On the third day, something amazing happened. Jake walked into his quarters after his shift, and Pip's scales suddenly shifted to a bright golden color. It wasn't random, Jake could tell the creature was responding to his presence. When Jake talked to it, the scales changed to different shades of blue. When he accidentally knocked over a tool and made a loud noise, the scales flashed red. Jake realized he was looking at something incredible, not just an alien creature, but one that was trying to talk to him through color. He had no idea that he'd just saved the life of someone who would soon return the favor in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Jake had never expected to have a work partner, especially one that could fit in his pocket. But within a week of rescuing Pip, the little creature had become his shadow during every maintenance shift. At first, Jake worried about bringing Pip along. What if someone spotted them? But the tiny dragon seemed to understand the need for secrecy, always ducking into Jake's tool bag or hiding behind equipment whenever other workers came around. The real surprise came when Jake was struggling with a particularly stubborn electrical panel on level 7. He'd been trying to locate a short circuit for over an hour, swearing under his breath as he traced wires through the cramped access space behind the wall. His human eyes couldn't see much in the dim maintenance area, and his handheld scanner kept giving him conflicting readings. That's when Pip squeezed out of Jake's shirt pocket and scurried into the narrow gap between the wall panels. The little creature's scales immediately started glowing with a soft purple light, and it began making excited chirping sounds. Jake watched in amazement as Pip navigated through the maze of wires like it had built-in radar, stopping at exactly the spot where the damaged cable was hidden. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake whispered, carefully extracting the burnt-out wire that Pip had found. The repair that should have taken him 3 hours was done in 20 minutes. From that day forward, Jake and Pip worked as a team. The little dragon could slip into spaces that would have required Jake to tear apart entire wall sections. Even better, Pip seemed to have some kind of natural ability to sense electrical problems. Whenever they approached faulty equipment, Pip's scales would change color, deep red for serious electrical hazards, yellow for minor issues, and green when everything was working properly. Jake had never been so efficient at his job. But Jake was curious about more than just Pip's useful abilities. Every evening back in his quarters, he worked on trying to understand how the little creature communicated. The color changes were obviously some kind of language, but Jake knew there had to be more to it. He'd noticed that Pip sometimes made soft humming sounds, almost musical, and the pitch seemed to correspond with different scale colors. Using spare parts from broken computers and communication equipment, Jake slowly built what he hoped would be a translation device. It was crude, basically just a sound analyzer connected to a color sensor with a simple computer trying to find patterns between the two. Jake was no programmer, but he'd picked up enough technical skills over his years of maintenance work to cobble something together. The breakthrough came after 3 weeks of patient work. Jake was sitting on his bunk, tinkering with the translator while Pip perched on his shoulder. The little dragon suddenly started making a complex series of harmonic sounds while its scales shifted through a rainbow of colors. The translation device beeped and displayed text on its tiny screen. "Thank you, friend." Jake's hands started shaking. You can understand me?" Pip's scales shifted to bright gold, and the translator displayed, "Always understood. Learning your sounds now." From that moment on, their conversations became more complex every day. Pip was incredibly intelligent, picking up human language concepts faster than Jake would have thought possible. Through their talks, Jake learned that Pip wasn't just some random space creature, it was a member of an ancient species called the Skyborn, beings that looked like crystalline dragons and had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. "My people thought extinct," Pip explained one evening, its scales cycling through sad shades of blue and gray. "Great war long ago. Skyborn scattered across galaxy. Most never found." Jake listened with growing horror as Pip told its story through the translator's choppy text. Pirates had attacked Pip's family while they were traveling between worlds. The attack happened so fast that there was no time for a proper escape. Pip's parents had shoved the youngster into an emergency pod and launched it just before their ship exploded. "Pod damaged in attack," Pip continued. "Systems failing. Crashed here, barely alive. Thought would die alone in cold place." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. He'd always thought he understood loneliness, bouncing from job to job, never staying in one place long enough to make real friends. But Pip's story was heartbreaking in a completely different way. The little dragon was possibly the last of its kind, orphaned and lost light years from anything familiar. Family scattered across stars, Pip managed to communicate. Don't know if others survived. Pirates hunt Skyborn for our, how you say, abilities. We sense energy, find hidden things. Valuable to bad people. That explained why Pip was so good at detecting electrical problems, Jake realized. The Skyborn had evolved to sense electromagnetic fields, probably to navigate through space or find resources on different planets. To pirates and slavers, that ability would be incredibly valuable for locating hidden treasures or detecting security systems. As the days passed, Jake found himself looking forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in his routine life. Pip was endlessly curious about human culture, asking questions about Earth, about Jake's family, about why humans had spread across so many worlds. In return, Pip shared stories about the Skyborn's ancient civilization, cities built inside asteroids, ships grown rather than constructed, and a society based on harmony and cooperation rather than the competitive chaos that seemed to define most of the galaxy. "You are a kind person, Jake," Pip said one night, its scales glowing with warm golden light. "Most beings see small creature, think not important. You saw me dying, chose to help anyway. This is rare thing in galaxy." Jake scratched Pip's tiny head gently, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since leaving Earth, he didn't feel completely alone in the vast, cold universe. He had a friend who genuinely cared about him, and he cared about Pip just as much. Neither of them knew that their bond would soon be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, or that Jake's simple act of kindness was about to change the course of human history forever. Jake's blood ran cold when he saw Inspector Reynolds stepping off the transport shuttle. The corporate oversight team only showed up every 3 months, but their timing couldn't have been worse. Jake had gotten comfortable over the past few weeks, maybe too comfortable. He and Pip had developed routines, and Jake had started to forget how dangerous their friendship really was. Reynolds was exactly the kind of company man Jake had learned to fear during his years working for the corporation. Tall, thin, and always wearing those expensive suits that looked completely out of place on a frontier station. The guy had cold gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw, looking for violations, inefficiencies, or anything that could be turned into a report back to headquarters. Jake tried to act normal during his shift, but his hands were shaking as he pushed his maintenance cart through the corridors. Pip, sensing Jake's anxiety, had turned a worried shade of purple and burrowed deep into Jake's tool bag. The little dragon seemed to understand that something was wrong, staying completely still and quiet. "Just routine inspection," Jake muttered to himself, but he knew better. Reynolds had a reputation for being thorough, and that meant going through personal quarters, checking inventory records, and interviewing workers about any unusual activities. If Reynolds found Pip, there would be no explaining it away as a pet or a harmless discovery. Jake had heard the stories from other stations. When corporate found interesting alien specimens, they didn't ask questions about how workers had come to possess them. They confiscated everything, shipped it off to research facilities on distant worlds, and the creatures were never seen again. The scientists would run tests, conduct experiments, and write papers. They'd dissect and analyze until there was nothing left to study. The thought of Pip ending up in some sterile laboratory made Jake sick to his stomach. This wasn't just some alien creature, this was his friend, maybe the only real friend he'd ever had. Pip had personality, emotions, intelligence. The little dragon told jokes through the translator, worried about Jake when he worked late shifts, and had even started learning human songs by analyzing the sound patterns when Jake hummed. That evening, Jake sat heavily on his bunk while Pip perched on his shoulder. The translator device sat between them, ready to convert their conversation. Jake had been dreading this moment, but he couldn't put it off any longer. "Pip, we need to talk about something serious," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Pip's scales immediately shifted to concerned blue. "Problem with Jake?" "Not with me, buddy. With us. There's a corporate inspector here, and if he finds you..." Jake trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The translator was quiet for a moment as Pip processed this information. Then the little dragon's scales cycled through several colors, confusion, fear, and finally a resigned gray. "Understand," appeared on the translator screen. "Must leave Jake to keep Jake safe." Jake felt tears starting to form in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Pip. I should have been more careful. I should have found a way to protect you better." Jake saved Pip when dying, the translator displayed. Jake gave Pip life, friendship, purpose. No apologies needed. Only gratitude. That night, Jake worked like he'd never worked before. He'd remembered seeing a damaged escape pod in the station's salvage bay, something that had been sitting there for months, marked for eventual disposal. It was small, just barely big enough for someone Pip's size, but the damage looked repairable if Jake could scrounge the right parts. He snuck down to the salvage bay after midnight, when the skeleton crew was busy with other duties. The pod was in rough shape, its navigation system was fried, the life support was barely functional, and the hull had several small breaches. But Jake had been fixing broken things his entire adult life. This was just another repair job, except this time it really mattered. Jake worked through the night, cannibalizing parts from other damaged equipment. He rerouted power systems, patched hull breaches with emergency sealant, and jury-rigged a basic navigation computer using components from 3 different broken devices. It wasn't pretty, but it would fly, and more importantly, it would keep Pip alive during the journey. As dawn approached on the station's artificial day cycle, Jake carried the repaired pod back to his quarters piece by piece. Pip watched silently as Jake made final adjustments, the little dragon scale shifting between colors that Jake had learned meant sadness and determination. "Where will you go?" Jake asked as he finished programming the navigation system with coordinates for uninhabited systems where Pip might be safe. "Search for others," Pip replied through the translator. "Maybe family survived. Maybe other Skyborn still alive somewhere in galaxy." Jake nodded, though his heart was breaking. He understood, Pip needed to find its own kind, needed to discover if there was still a future for the Skyborn species. But that didn't make saying goodbye any easier. As Jake prepared to seal Pip into the tiny escape pod, something unexpected happened. The little dragon moved to the center of Jake's quarters and began what could only be described as a ceremony. Pip's scales started cycling through every color Jake had ever seen, and many he hadn't. The colors shifted in complex patterns, like a living rainbow, while Pip made harmonious sounds that were more beautiful than any music Jake had ever heard. The translator worked overtime, trying to keep up with the flood of communication. Words and phrases appeared on the screen faster than Jake could read them: bond brother, life debt, sacred trust, family chosen, never forgotten, always connected. Finally, the display showed a single phrase that made Jake's breath catch in his throat: brother bond, debt sworn, remember always. Jake understood. This wasn't just goodbye, this was Pip making a promise, creating some kind of unbreakable connection between them. In Skyborn culture, saving someone's life apparently created obligations and bonds that lasted forever. "I'll remember too," Jake whispered, gently stroking Pip's crystalline scales one last time. "You take care of yourself out there, okay? And if you ever need help, you know where to find me." Pip's scales flashed bright gold, the color Jake had learned meant pure happiness and affection. Then the little dragon climbed into the escape pod, curling up in the makeshift cushioned area Jake had prepared. Jake sealed the pod and carried it to one of the station's unused airlocks. His hands were shaking as he initiated the launch sequence, watching on the small monitor as the pod's engines fired and it began moving away from Terra Station. Through the viewport, Jake could see the tiny pod accelerating toward the edge of the system. Within minutes, it had engaged its makeshift hyperdrive and disappeared in a flash of distorted space, carrying Pip toward whatever destiny awaited among the stars. Jake stood at that viewport for a long time after the pod vanished, tears streaming down his face. For 3 months, he'd had a purpose beyond just fixing broken pipes and cleaning up messes. He'd had a friend who cared about him, someone who looked forward to seeing him every day. Now he was alone again, just another human maintenance worker in the vast, indifferent galaxy. He had no idea that this wasn't really an ending, but the beginning of something that would change everything he thought he knew about friendship, loyalty, and what it meant to be human in a universe full of wonders. Life on Terra Station had returned to its usual dull routine after Pip left. Jake went through the motions of his maintenance work, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The corridors felt emptier, the work felt pointless, and Jake found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see a tiny crystalline dragon peeking out from behind some equipment. But Pip was gone, somewhere out in the vast galaxy, and Jake was back to being just another lonely human doing a job that nobody else wanted. The other workers had started to notice that Jake seemed different. He used to hum while he worked, sometimes even whistling old Earth songs as he pushed his cart through the station's maze of hallways. Now he moved through his duties in silence, finishing his shifts as quickly as possible and retreating to his quarters to stare at the empty space where Pip's makeshift habitat used to be. Jake had kept the translation device he'd built, even though it served no purpose now. Sometimes he'd turn it on and listen to the static, remembering the excitement he'd felt when it first started converting Pip's color songs into words he could understand. He wondered if Pip had found other Skyborn, if the little dragon was safe, if it ever thought about their time together on the station. 3 months passed this way. Jake was beginning to think that maybe it was time to request a transfer to another station, somewhere he could start fresh without constant reminders of his lost friend. He'd even started looking at job postings for maintenance positions on ships heading toward the Outer Rim territories. Then everything changed in a matter of minutes. Jake was finishing his shift on level 12 when every alarm on Terra Station started blaring at once. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing the corridors in pulsing red light. Jake had been through drills before, but this felt different. The alarms weren't following the pattern for a routine emergency exercise. His comm unit crackled to life with frantic chatter from the command center. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Unidentified vessels approaching the station at high speed. Jake dropped his tools and ran toward the nearest observation deck. Other workers were doing the same thing, clustering around the viewports to see what was happening outside. What Jake saw made his jaw drop. Ships were emerging from hyperspace near Terra Station, but these weren't like anything Jake had ever seen before. Most spacecraft looked like they'd been built in factories, all straight lines, welded joints, and functional design. These vessels looked like they'd been grown instead of constructed. Their hulls were smooth and organic, covered in scales that shifted color even as Jake watched. Some of the ships were small and sleek, moving with the grace of dolphins through water. Others were massive, easily the size of orbital stations, their surfaces alive with patterns of light that rippled across their crystalline exteriors. "What the hell are those things?" someone whispered behind Jake. Before anyone could answer, the station's public address system crackled to life with an announcement from the command center. "This is Station Commander Walsh. We are being approached by an unidentified fleet of vessels. All civilian personnel are ordered to remain in secure areas until further notice." Jake pressed his face against the viewport, counting at least 20 ships of various sizes. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of fish or a flock of birds. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the way they glided through space, their scaled hulls catching and reflecting the light from Terra Station's external illumination. The comm channels were going crazy with chatter from the Galactic Trade Authority ships that patrolled this sector. Jake could hear fragments of panicked communications: "Unknown vessels, identify yourselves immediately. Failure to comply will result in, weapon systems are charging." Then Jake heard something that made his blood run cold. The voice of Admiral Hendricks from the GTA flagship, transmitted on an open channel for everyone on the station to hear. "Unknown fleet, you are in violation of Galactic Trade Authority space. Surrender immediately or we will open fire. You have 60 seconds to comply." Jake's heart was pounding. These beautiful, mysterious ships were about to be attacked by the GTA fleet, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The Trade Authority shot first and asked questions later. It's how they'd maintained control over this sector for decades. But then something incredible happened. Instead of responding to Admiral Hendricks' ultimatum, the lead ship in the mysterious fleet began broadcasting on a frequency that every communication device in the sector could receive. What came through wasn't the usual harsh electronic tones that most alien species used for interstellar communication. It was music, complex, harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate in Jake's chest. And then, cutting through the beautiful alien music, came words in perfect human standard language. "Terra Station, this is Prince Talon of the Skyborn. We come in peace, seeking permission to dock. We are looking for Jake Miller, maintenance worker, level 7 residential quarters." Jake's knees nearly buckled. The voice was deeper now, more mature and confident, but he recognized those harmonic undertones immediately. It was Pip. His little friend had not only survived the dangerous journey into unknown space, but had apparently grown up, found others of its kind, and returned with an entire fleet. "That's impossible," Jake whispered to himself. Pip was just a baby. How could it be commanding a whole fleet? The station's comm system erupted with confused chatter. Commander Walsh was trying to establish proper diplomatic contact while Admiral Hendricks was demanding to know how an unknown alien species knew the name of a specific human worker. The other maintenance staff around Jake were staring at him like he'd suddenly grown a second head. "Jake Miller, please respond," came the voice from the lead ship again. "This is your friend Pip, though my proper name is Prince Talon of the Crystal Wing Clan. I have returned as promised, and I have brought my family to meet the human who showed kindness when kindness was needed most." Prince Talon. Jake's mind was reeling. The tiny, dying creature he'd rescued from the waste disposal area wasn't just any skyborn, it was royalty. No wonder it had been so intelligent, so quick to learn. Jake had unknowingly saved the life of an alien prince. The implications hit Jake like a thunderbolt. If Pip, Prince Talon, was royalty among the skyborn, and if this fleet represented his people, then Jake had just become the most important human being in this entire sector of space. First contact with a new alien species was usually handled by trained diplomats and government officials, not maintenance workers who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Jake's comm unit buzzed with an incoming call from Commander Walsh. With shaking hands, Jake answered. "Miller, get up to the command center immediately." Walsh's voice was tight with stress and barely controlled panic. "We need to know everything about your contact with this Prince Talon. And I mean everything. The fate of this entire station might depend on what you know about these aliens." As Jake rushed toward the command center, he could see through the viewports that more skyborne ships were still arriving, their crystalline hulls reflecting the stars like living jewels. The tiny dragon he'd shared his dinner rations with had returned, but it had brought the power to reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. Jake had thought their friendship was over when Pip disappeared into hyperspace 3 months ago. He never could have imagined that it was just the beginning of something that would change his life, and possibly the future of his entire species, forever. When Jake finally made it to Terra Station's command center, he walked into pure chaos. Officers were running between control stations, communication boards were lighting up with incoming messages from across the sector, and Commander Walsh looked like he hadn't slept in days even though this had all started just an hour ago. Miller. Walsh grabbed Jake's arm the moment he walked through the door. Tell me you have some idea what's happening out there. Because right now, we've got 20+ unknown warships asking specifically for you, the Galactic Trade Authority is about to start shooting, and I've got corporate headquarters demanding explanations I don't have. Jake looked around the command center, feeling completely out of place among all the uniformed officers and sophisticated equipment. Sir, I know this sounds crazy, but I think the creature I've been talking to is someone I helped a few months ago. A small alien that was hurt and needed medical attention. Small alien? Walsh's eyes went wide. Miller, that fleet out there represents more firepower than anything we've seen in this sector. You're telling me their commander is some pet you've been hiding? Before Jake could answer, the main communication console erupted with an incoming transmission. The beautiful harmonic music filled the command center again, followed by that familiar voice, though deeper and more authoritative than Jake remembered. Terra Station Command, this is Prince Talon of the Skyborn. I request permission to come aboard with a small diplomatic party. I wish to reunite with my bond brother Jake Miller and discuss matters of mutual benefit to our peoples. Commander Walsh stared at Jake like he'd suddenly discovered his maintenance worker was actually an alien spy. Bond brother? What the hell have you gotten us into, Miller? 20 minutes later, Jake found himself standing in the station's main docking bay, wearing the cleanest work uniform he owned and trying not to shake with nervousness. Commander Walsh stood beside him along with every senior officer on the station, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The airlock hissed open, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The creature that emerged was definitely Pip, but transformed in ways Jake could hardly believe. Where once a tiny dragon the size of his fist had perched on his shoulder, now a magnificent being nearly 8 feet tall glided into the docking bay. Prince Talon's scales were like living jewels, shifting through every color Jake had ever seen and several he was pretty sure didn't exist in normal light spectra. But it was definitely Pip. Jake could see it in the way the dragon's head tilted when he was thinking, the way his scales flickered to gold when he spotted Jake across the docking bay, and especially in those intelligent amber eyes that had first made Jake stop and help a dying creature months ago. My friend, Prince Talon said, his voice resonating through the docking bay without any need for translation devices. You look well. I have missed our conversations. Jake stepped forward, ignoring the gasps from the officers behind him. Pip? Is that really you? You're so big. Prince Talon's scales shimmered with what Jake had learned was the Skyborn equivalent of laughter. Skyborn grow quickly when we are healthy and happy. Your care gave me the strength to mature properly. And my name among my people is Prince Talon of the Crystal Wing Clan, heir to the Skyborn throne. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. You're a prince? I mean, you're actually royalty. Indeed. And you, Jake Miller, are the human who saved the life of Skyborn royalty without expecting any reward. This is a debt that can never be fully repaid. Commander Walsh stepped forward, clearly trying to regain some control of the situation. Your Highness, on behalf of Terra Station and the human colonial government, we welcome you and seek to establish proper diplomatic relations. Prince Talon's attention shifted to Walsh, and Jake could see the dragon's expression become more formal, more regal. Commander Walsh, your welcome is accepted. But understand that I am here primarily because of the bond debt I owe to Jake Miller. His kindness has changed everything for my people. Over the next several hours, Jake listened in amazement as Prince Talon explained the situation to the assembled station leadership. The Skyborn had indeed been thought extinct, scattered across the galaxy after a catastrophic war centuries ago. Most of them had lived in hiding, avoiding contact with other species who might exploit their abilities or hunt them for their valuable crystalline scales. When Jake saved my life, Prince Talon explained, his scales cycling through serious blue and purple hues, he did something my people had almost forgotten was possible. He showed mercy to a stranger, expecting nothing in return. This act of pure kindness reminded us that not all species in the galaxy are driven by greed and conquest. Jake found out that his little friend had been part of a reconnaissance mission, scouting new territories where the scattered Skyborn clans might be able to reunite. The pirate attack that had left Pip dying on Terra Station had been specifically targeting Skyborn for the slave markets. Their electromagnetic sensing abilities made them incredibly valuable for treasure hunting and security work. But Jake's actions proved that some beings choose compassion over profit, Prince Talon continued. After I recovered and found my way back to our hidden fleet, I convinced the clan mothers that humanity might be different from the other species we had encountered. The next revelation was even more shocking. The Skyborn weren't just scattered refugees, they were the inheritors of technology that was thousands of years ahead of anything currently used by the major galactic powers. Their ships could travel faster than any known hyperdrive system, their weapons could disable entire fleets without causing permanent damage, and their knowledge of energy manipulation was beyond anything human scientists had ever imagined. We offer humanity a partnership, Prince Talon announced, his scales shifting to the gold that Jake remembered meant happiness and friendship. Shared technology, mutual protection, and access to territories that have been under Skyborn protection for millennia. In exchange, we ask only for what Jake has already given us, respect, friendship, and the promise that humans will treat the Skyborn as equals rather than resources to be exploited. The political implications were staggering. Overnight, humanity had gone from being a minor colonial power to having the most advanced alien allies in known space. The Galactic Trade Authority, which had been preparing to attack the Skyborn fleet, suddenly found themselves facing beings who could disable their weapons systems with a thought and travel between stars faster than their messages could be transmitted. Within a week, Jake found himself in a position he never could have imagined. The Earth government had appointed him as humanity's first ambassador to the Skyborn, recognizing that his unique relationship with Prince Talon made him irreplaceable in maintaining the new alliance. Jake had gone from fixing broken pipes to negotiating treaties that would reshape the balance of power across dozens of star systems. But the moment that really drove home how much his life had changed came when Prince Talon invited Jake aboard the Skyborn flagship. The crystalline dreadnought was like nothing Jake had ever seen, its corridors seemed to grow organically from walls that pulsed with living light, and the bridge was a chamber that looked like the inside of a giant geode, with control surfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. "This is where you belong now," Prince Talon told Jake as they stood together looking out at the combined human and Skyborn fleets. Below them, engineers from both species worked side by side, integrating technologies that neither could have developed alone. Jake watched human technicians learning to interface with Skyborn biomechanical systems while Skyborn engineers marveled at humanity's innovative approaches to problem-solving. It was exactly the kind of cooperation he'd dreamed about during his lonely years working maintenance jobs across the galaxy. "You know what's funny?" Jake said, watching a human engineer successfully activate a Skyborn power core with help from one of Prince Talon's advisors. "All my life, I just wanted to fix things that were broken. I never imagined I'd end up helping to fix the relationship between two entire species." Prince Talon's scales shimmered with warm golden light. "Perhaps that is exactly why you were the right person for this task, Bond brother. You saw a broken creature that needed help, and you helped without asking what you might gain from it. That is the foundation upon which all lasting alliances must be built." As Jake looked out at the impossible vista of crystalline ships and human vessels working together among the stars, he realized that sometimes the most important moments in history started with the smallest acts of kindness. A lonely janitor had chosen to help a dying creature, and that simple decision had changed the fate of both their species forever. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would Jake Miller, but as he stood beside his old friend on the bridge of a ship grown from living crystal, he couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else in the universe.